Woman was God's second mistake. A line from Nietzsche that lands like a punch to the soul. It doesn't just provoke, it wounds, it fractures. It's like a jagged stone thrown into the still waters of contemporary thought. It creates ripples of discomfort that refuse to fade. Shocking. Deeply offensive to many. It bears the unmistakable mark of entrenched misogyny. But what if this wasn't born in Nietzsche's mind alone? What if the soil had already been tilled for such a statement to take root? Long before Nietzsche voiced such brutal, unfiltered thoughts. His mentor, his philosophical predecessor, an intellectual guide, had already laid down the dark foundation. The man who taught him how to gaze unflinchingly into the abyss of existence, the man who distilled despair into doctrine, that man was Arthur Schopenhauer. Welcome to your inner mirror. Today we begin one of our most harrowing, yet perhaps most necessary, explorations. We venture deep into the shadowed intellect of one of the most unflinching, sharp-edged, and brutally honest philosophers in history. Our focus, to dissect one of his most infamous convictions. What did Arthur Schopenhauer really think about? Women. Let me say this up front. It will not be easy to digest. Schopenhauer's words are not coded in civility or warmth. They are piercingly cold, stark, and often cruel. He has long been accused of misogyny, and in many ways the label fits. But labels, by their nature, simplify. Here, we resist simplicity. True philosophy demands more than outrage, requires examination, so we ask the harder questions. What was he really trying to say? Why did he hold such beliefs? Could it be, just possibly, that beneath the bitterness lies a truth too unsettling? To acknowledge openly that we label it hate not because it is false, but because it is intolerable? We're not here to exonerate Schopenhauer, nor to soften his words. We're here to do something far more challenging, to understand him, to probe the architecture of his thought, not as outbursts of malice, but as part of a deliberate diagnosis. A diagnosis by a man who believed he had uncovered the hidden sickness at the core of human life. And to grasp his worldview, we must also turn the lens inward. Could it be that some of his harshest ideas resonate with feelings we've all quietly harbored, feelings we've been conditioned never to speak aloud? To truly understand what Schopenhauer believed about women, we must begin at the source, the heart of his entire philosophy. For Schopenhauer, the universe was not a divine playground, not a harmonious or rational system. He did not see meaning or purpose. Instead, he saw it governed by a blind, directionless force without reason, compassion, or final goal. A force that simply wants to survive, to multiply, to perpetuate itself through endless cycles of birth, desire, pain, and death. Schopenhauer named this force the will to live. Everything around us, people, animals, nature's, merely the visible surface, the thin veil covering this deeper, more primal reality. And we are not free agents, are not the rational beings we like to imagine, or marionettes, animated by the invisible strings of the will. Our ambitions, loves, cravings, they are not uniquely ours. They're instruments used by the will to ensure its own survival. The will has one relentless objective: to preserve life at all costs. And to Schopenhauer, that our life's defined by suffering. He famously wrote that life swings like a pendulum, endlessly moving between pain and boredom. When we crave what we lack, we suffer in longing. But even when we finally attain our desires, the satisfaction is fleeting. No sooner do we grasp it than we feel the pull of emptiness once more, a restless hunger. So we begin again, always reaching, never arriving, and the cycle of pain begins again. We are like beggars handed a piece of bread today, only to return starving tomorrow. Happiness. It's nothing more than a shimmering mirage, fleeting, touchable, a brief illusion in an endless desert of longing and suffering. In this bleak and unyielding landscape, Schopenhauer shifts his gaze toward the human species. It is here that he introduces one of his most controversial and defining distinctions. To Schopenhauer, men and women are not two versions of the same human being. They are not merely different in degree, but in kind crafted as two distinct instruments. each molded by the will to achieve a singular biological aim, the continuation of life. In his infamous essay on women, he makes statements that still sting today. He writes that women possess less capacity for logical thought, are driven more by short-term instincts, lack a profound sense of justice, and are more susceptible to deception. These words are harsh, no question. But Schopenhauer insists that they are not rooted in personal animosity or emotion. He sees them instead as consequences of a larger metaphysical structure, a cold, impersonal logic of how life and the will function. To him, woman is the purest, most perfect embodiment of the will to live. She is not inferior, she is essential. The guardian of the species. Everything about her instincts, her intelligence, even her sense of time is finely tuned by nature for one supreme task: to preserve and pass on life. When Schopenhauer says that woman lives trapped in the present moment, he is not calling her unintelligent. Rather, he argues that her focus on the now is what makes her indispensable. Her mission, as shaped by the will, is to protect and nurture life here and now. Her strength lies not in speculation or abstraction, but in practical instinct. Her mind is grounded in reality, the everyday needs of the home, the raising of children, the management of survival. She cannot afford, Schopenhauer says, to chase after ideals or transcendental truths, because her function is tethered to life itself. She doesn't seek truth or beauty in some lofty philosophical way. She seeks stability, safety, and continuity for herself, for her offspring. And crucially, Schopenhauer emphasizes that this is not a moral critique. It is not about worth. It is about role. It is about nature's design through the will. In contrast, the man is a strange exception and anomaly in nature's grand machine. While woman serves the will entirely, man has the unique, tragic capacity to rebel against it. He alone can step away from the biological imperative. A man can forsake comfort, security, even his life, in pursuit of something with no survival benefit. He might fall in battle for a principle like honor. He may spend a lifetime building a cathedral he'll never see finished. He may starve in the pursuit of a mathematical riddle, go mad composing a symphony no one will ever understand, or paint a vision only his soul can see. In these moments, whether through art, science, or self-sacrifice, man betrays the will. He defies nature's programming. He reaches not for survival, but for transcendence. He chases eternal truths, devotes himself to beauty, embraces suffering for meaning's sake. He walks away from instinct and dares to serve something higher. And it is here, in this fracture between man and woman, between service to life and defiance of it, that Schopenhauer's bitterness takes root. For him, woman represents the full affirmation of life. And life in his eyes is no blessing. It is a burden, a curse, a trap. But in man's creative madness, his longing for the eternal, Schopenhauer sees the rare, flickering hope. The ability to reject life, to escape the will through renunciation, through art, and through a defiant act of saying no. Woman is the species' grounded sanity. Man, at his most transcendent, is sacred madness, the only being daring enough to turn his back on nature itself. It's a powerful contrast, a grounded anchor and a dangerous dreamer. But this worldview, already sharp, becomes even more brutal when it turns its lens toward love. To Schopenhauer, romantic love is nature's cruelest deception, the most elegant and convincing trick the will to live has ever devised. In his essay, The Metaphysics of Sexual Love, he claims something startling. When a man falls madly, passionately in love, he is not making a free choice. There is no reasoned decision. Instead, it is the species choosing through him silently, invisibly. But with immense force, all the emotions we associate with love, the soulmates, the destiny, the poetry, and longing are, in Schopenhauer's view, a biological disguise, a beautifully crafted illusion meant to conceal a single, primal goal: reproduction in the most efficient and effective way possible. The will, ever cunning, wears the mask of romance to keep the cycle of life turning. A man is drawn often irresistibly to youth, symmetry, vitality. Why? Not because of surface beauty alone, but because these are signs. embedded deep in our evolutionary history of fertility and the ability to produce healthy offspring. A woman, in turn, is attracted to strength, intelligence, social standing, and resources not purely out of admiration or compatibility, but because these traits ensure protection and stability during the vulnerable years of motherhood. And so, what we call falling in love is, in Schopenhauer's terms, a genetic strategy. A calculated process masked as emotion designed to bind to people who, outside the influence of the will, might be indifferent or even repelled by one another. Passion, he insists, is a mirage. It blazes briefly, then fades just as soon as the will gets what it came for, reproduction. And this, the moment where love shifts from magic to transaction, is where Schopenhauer's perspective on women becomes not only deeply unsettling, but for many men, eerily familiar. In his view, even if only on a subconscious level, women understand that their influence over men is rooted in the sexual desire they awaken. And this desire, once stirred, becomes a powerful tool. Charm, softness, flirtation, even apparent fragility, all of these, Schopenhauer argues, are instinctive tactics. Biological weapons designed to attract, ensnare, and secure the most capable provider available. When a woman marries for love, he says, she is in fact securing a long-term contract protection, resources, and future stability. When a man marries for love, he is unknowingly signing a blank check to the species. Yes, it's offensive, undeniably so. And yes, it may be a cold, exaggerated generalization. But before we condemn Schopenhauer outright, we're forced to confront a more uncomfortable question. Haven't we seen echoes of this around us? In our friends, our families, perhaps even in ourselves? Haven't we seen brilliant men, full of talent and direction, suddenly alter their entire course, abandoning dreams, sacrificing time, wealth, even sanity, all for a love that seemed to burn with unshakable urgency? And haven't we noticed how relationships, once filled with passion and mystery, begin to shift after marriage, after children? What begins as fire becomes function. The dynamic transforms, no longer driven by thrill or destiny, but by partnership, structure, routine, and survival. Romance gives way to responsibility. Schopenhauer doesn't just observe this change, he names it. He gives it a voice. Philosophy. It's a feeling of being drawn into something beautiful, intoxicating, a sweet-smelling trap, one that only reveals its true purpose with time. But to stop here would be shallow. To merely label him a cynic, a misogynist, or a bitter soul would be to miss the greater point. To truly understand this philosophy and the pain and perhaps truth it holds, we must now go deeper into the life of the man himself. Because ideas don't rise from nothing. They grow out of experience, shaped by moments of despair, glimpses of joy, and often more than anything else, by pain. Schopenhauer's work is not just cold theory pulled from abstract thought. It is personal, intimate. It is pain turned into philosophy. And that pain begins not with some grand metaphysical dilemma, but with the first and perhaps most influential woman in his life, his mother, Hannah Schopenhauer. Johanna was not an ordinary woman of her time. Far from it. She was brilliant, intellectually alive, and fiercely independent. A respected novelist in her own right, she was a woman of status and substance. Hosting one of Germany's most elite literary salons in Weimar after the apparent suicide of her husband. Surrounded by poets, artists, and thinkers, Johanna was magnetic, charismatic, well-read, and worldly. But to her son Arthur, she was something else entirely. Cold, emotionally distant. A wall he could never climb. To him, she was not a source of comfort, but a source of ache. Their relationship, rather than tender or nurturing, became an ongoing emotional war, bitter and deeply personal. She saw him as gloomy, arrogant, overbearing. He saw her as vain, performative, and narcissistic. The letters between them drip with sarcasm, contempt, and the pain of unmet expectations. So when Schopenhauer later described women as incapable of objectivity, consumed with vanity, and obsessed With appearances, it's almost impossible not to see Johanna's shadow in every word. His misogyny wasn't born solely in books. It bled from a very old wound, the ache of a boy who felt unloved, unseen, and ultimately rejected by the woman who should have offered warmth. Over time, that emotional scar calcified into a worldview, a theory not just about his mother, but about half of all humanity. To understand this isn't to excuse it. It doesn't justify the harshness of his views, but it adds a layer of tragic complexity. It allows us to see the wounded human behind the so-called monster, and it leads us to a deeper, more haunting insight, one that's been hiding just beneath the surface all along. Schopenhauer didn't just hate women. He feared them. Why? Because in his eyes, they were the ultimate agents of the will, the primal force he believed ruled all life. Women, in his view, represented everything that was subtle, irrational, and uncontrollably powerful. A force that didn't argue or overpower with logic, but one that dominated through desire. What happens to the man who tries to resist? A man may build entire systems of logic. He may pursue discipline, seek solitude, devote himself to reason, to art, to truth. He might spend his entire life trying to ascend above instinct, above the flesh. But then she appears. A woman, the embodiment of beauty, the promise of pleasure, the voice of life calling him back, and suddenly his tower of logic crumbles. Noble pursuits falter. The philosopher becomes a beast again, dragged down not by force, but by the sweet, intoxicating pull of what he thought he had escaped. To Schopenhauer, a woman's power did not come from physical strength or intellectual debate. It came from something more ancient, more primal. The power of seduction, the timeless ability to lure even the strongest man off his path, to make him trade eternal truths for fleeting pleasure, to dissolve his highest values in the illusion of romantic unity. She becomes, in his metaphor, the smiling face of the biological prison, and he the man who spent his life searching for the key. For an exit from suffering, saw her not just as another prisoner, but as its most cunning guard. And it is here, in this harsh and brutal warning about the power of desire, that the old pessimist from Frankfurt, despite his bitterness, despite the harshness of his voice, still manages to strike a deeply human chord, one that, though difficult to admit, still echoes in the human heart today. Let me know when you're ready for the next section, or if you'd like me to help compile all the parts into a seamless full chapter. Because if we're honest, and if we look around, Schopenhauer's warning isn't just some outdated 19th century philosophy locked in dusty books. It's a recurring drama, unfolding quietly, sometimes tragically, across modern life every single day. A man who has a mission, who walks with purpose and conviction, carries a certain, focused, masculine energy. That purpose might take many forms: his craft, his career, his spiritual path, or his role as a builder of something larger than himself. It's his guiding star, the axis around which his life turns. But here lies one of the most common and silent tragedies of modern man. A man meets a woman, and under the intoxicating spell of passion, he begins to shift. Gradually, sometimes without even noticing, he gives it all up. His mission, his ambitions, the friends who ground him, the routines that shaped him, they fall away. He elevates love above all, places her at the center of his existence, and builds his world around her. And in doing so, he loses command of his own ship. He no longer steers with direction. He becomes a passenger, drifting in waters he no longer charts. And then comes the cruel irony. The very act of surrendering his purpose intended to deepen love becomes the seed of its undoing. Because in abandoning his core, his independence, his ambition, his hunger for mastery, he also abandons what made him magnetic in the first place. That driven energy begins to fade. He becomes overly available, emotionally dependent, orbiting rather than grounded. And slowly, often silently, the woman who once admired him begins to lose respect. Not out of cruelty, but because something fundamental has shifted, deep down. A woman cannot fully respect a man who has lost touch with his center. The love that once promised to build him now seems to hollow him out. The connection that was meant to empower ends up weakening his soul. And so, Schopenhauer leaves us with a final warning, a parting truth that when stripped of bitterness becomes a surprisingly clear and timeless principle. Don't be deceived by the perfume of desire. Don't blindly follow your most intense emotions. Look deeper than the beautiful face, the sweet voice, the magnetic allure. Take a breath and ask, is this passion truly my own? Is this love a conscious choice of a free manner? Is it the ancient voice of the species speaking through me? Am I being used by the blind will, the force that doesn't care for my peace, my growth, or the integrity of my soul? This isn't a rejection of love. It's not a cold, loveless strategy. It's a call for awareness. It's an invitation to enter love with your eyes wide open. Within every man, Schopenhauer reminds us, there are two forces constantly at war. One is the individual seeking purpose, clarity, and transcendence. The other is the animal wired only to reproduce, to seek pleasure. To obey biology, the wise man does not deny his animal instincts. He knows them. He respects them. But he never lets them take the wheel. A man who knows himself, who understands his direction and remains devoted to his mission can absolutely love, but he does not love out of emptiness. He loves from fullness. He welcomes a woman into his life as a partner in purpose, not as the purpose itself. He brings her into his world, but does not abandon his world to dwell inside hers. His love is not desperation masked as romance. It is strength offered freely. It is clarity wrapped in warmth. He understands that his value is not defined by her affection, but by his own self-loyalty, his unwavering commitment to his path, to his principles, to his truth. Schopenhauer's philosophy is a bitter medicine, hard to swallow. But sometimes the bitterest medicines are the ones that heal the deepest wounds. Schopenhauer's words, though harsh and uncomfortable, compel us to confront the unsettling possibility that even our most cherished emotions, those we often place at the core of our identity, might be woven from illusion. It's not lies, perhaps, but elaborate biological performances shaped by nature's agenda, not our own. His philosophy forces us to pause and look inward, to ask questions we're rarely encouraged to ask. What if love, that most poetic of human experiences, is not always sacred? What if it sometimes serves something more primal, more indifferent to our happiness than we care to admit? Schopenhauer doesn't offer comfort, he offers clarity. And in that clarity, perhaps, lies a strange kind of liberation. Because once we recognize that we are not entirely free, that our instincts, our urges, even our dreams, can be subtly directed by forces older and deeper than we imagine we earn, the possibility of rising above them, we find a chance to stop reacting blindly and start choosing consciously. That is the beginning of a higher freedom. The freedom to not be a servant to our impulses. The freedom to build a life guided not by fleeting passions, but by steady purpose. In the end, we don't have to accept his darkest conclusion, that life is only suffering and that denial is the only escape. That vision, while powerful, is not the only path, but we can, and perhaps we must, heed his warning. A call to build a center of gravity so solid, a purpose so luminous, and a sense of dignity so deeply rooted that no wave of desire, number storm of infatuation, can drag us off course. I hope this reflection, deep, disquieting, and maybe even a bit painful, has opened a window, new way of seeing the forces that move within us. If you've come this far, I commend you sincerely. It means you carry a rare strength, the courage to look beneath the surface, to stare into the shadow without turning away. But I don't want this to be where the conversation ends. Let this be a beginning. Share your thoughts in the comments. As always, with the honesty and respect that define this community, have you ever felt this tension in your life between your purpose and the pull of romantic love? Have you ever stopped to wonder whether what felt like destiny was perhaps biology wearing a mask? Your experiences matter. They add color and truth to this discussion. If you've made it to the end of this journey into the complex mind of Schopenhauer, write the word "will" in the comments. It will be our quiet signal to one another, recognition of those who aren't afraid to walk through darkness in search of light. And if this video gave you something valuable, if it challenged you, stirred you, or simply made you think, please support your inner mirror by subscribing, liking, and sharing this conversation. Every gesture of support helps us continue this exploration of difficult but necessary truths. And remember, this isn't about fearing women, it's about understanding nature and, more than anything, understanding and mastering yourself. Until next time, hold your center.